Let's talk about our democracy. How do you feel about having to produce photo ID next time you vote? This is in the Queen's speech. The government are planning this measure, but will it disenfranchise some members of our society? I'm delighted to welcome Emma Revell, a very good friend of the show, Head of Public Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Very well. Great to have you back on the show. It's been too long. Tell me about this. I mean, is this a serious proposal from the government that you will have to show photo ID just to vote?
It is a serious proposal. It's been, mentioned by the Conservative Party in the past, and they have run trials in the general election in 2019. So, yeah, I think this absolutely is a serious proposal. I don't think that means it's... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's not cast in stone. You know the maxim of American TV, don't fix it if it ain't broke. We don't have a problem with electoral tampering or corruption, do we?
Not on any real scale, no. I mean, from the general election in 2019, the Electoral Commission investigated 595 allegations of electoral fraud, 4 of which resulted in a conviction and 2 people were cautioned. Now, in a country that has tens of millions of voters, that really doesn't seem like a big issue to me.
And you've been shooting from the hip on this one on Twitter. Very, very interesting. Your comments earlier today, Emma. Why are you concerned about this policy? Because many would think, well, if it weeds out a small amount of corruption, then it's the way to go.
Yes, that is some people's argument, but actually, my point would be that the levels of electoral fraud are so infinitesimally low in this country that really any steps, any serious measure to introduce, a requirement to show voter ID, especially if it's photo ID, will actually lead to more disenfranchisement and fewer people voting. 1 in 5 adults in the UK do not have any form of voter ID. And, this is a disproportionate number of ethnic minority voters in particular. So any measures to require voter ID to be shown before you're allowed to vote is, I think, inevitably going to lead to fewer people voting.
It's not great for young people either, is it, Emma, which you've pointed out, because young people don't tend to have driving licenses or may not have a driving license. And do we really want to go around with a passport every time we've got to vote? I mean, that sounds risky to me.
Well, this is the thing. Many people will point out that, young people have to have photo ID to buy alcohol, for example. Quite a lot of people do have access to ID. It's not the case that we're saying that, no one has access to ID or it's particularly difficult to get it. It's not very expensive, although for people on very low incomes, it's certainly £70 for a driving license or a passport is probably an expense they could do without. But any kind of additional hurdle that's introduced that makes it even a little bit harder for people who are maybe on the fence about voting and may vote, but they're not very sure, just making it even that little bit harder to vote is going to disenfranchise people.
Well, I agree, Emma, and I voted on Thursday, and I even forgot the polling card because that's really just a reminder of where you're going. You don't need it. Some people think you need the polling card. It's convenient for the officers at the polling station if you bring it, but you don't have to. At the moment, voting is a seamless process, and why would you adulterate that?
Well, it is. I mean, if we had very large, widespread issues of voter fraud, I'm open. I'm not against making the process more secure. Democracy is such a vital part of our society, and we must safeguard it. But people who I think are making the claim that the integrity of the ballot box is being eroded by electoral fraud are really overblowing the issue and introducing measures that I think, if anything, will weaken democracy in this country, not strengthen it.
At the IEA, you guys are all about creative freedom, economic freedom, and very much the power of the individual. One concern I would have about photo ID to vote is that's the thin end of the wedge. It's a bit like vaccine passports. Once you've established the principle that you need ID for that transaction, it could be extended to other transactions.
Well, you say that, Mark, but actually, some of the most passionate arguments I've had on this issue today have been with colleagues at the IEA. We're quite happy to disagree with each other as much as we, disagree with anyone else. But that would certainly be my argument. A lot of people have been quite rightly outraged at the idea of vaccine passports and having to show, proof of vaccination to get into pubs or restaurants, for example. And it's all part of the same conversation for me. It's an overreaction to an issue, especially when it comes to voting, that really isn't there.
It's the principle, isn't it, of having to reach into your wallet, to have one of your rights. And that's why it bothers me.
Well, exactly. I understand that, there's a difference between casting a vote and going into a restaurant. One is a fundamental point of a functioning democracy. But I think that means we should keep it as open as possible to as many people as possible. We shouldn't be throwing additional hurdles in the way.
Final thought, Emma, what are your feelings about the state opening of Parliament tomorrow? What are your feelings about the economy, about a week today, a semi-lifting of lockdown restrictions, hopefully total freedom by the 21st of June? Are you feeling optimistic about the future of this country?
I'm feeling optimistic about the future. I don't think the state opening of Parliament is going to be what's doing it for me. I will be on Mike Graham's show tomorrow to talk about
Brilliant.
it. But, it's interesting that the things that have been trailed are not necessarily big economic policies. It's things like voter ID, for example, and some talk on housing. Well, we've been talking about building more housing for decades. So I'd be interested to see what else is in it and if there's anything radical.
Well, Emma, I look forward to hearing you with Mike tomorrow. Mike is live from College Green at 10. Thank you so much for joining us. Emma Revell is not having photo ID every time you want to vote. What are your thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000.